right. Well, welcome back to the fourth ever podcast of the Stormwater Circuit Rider series. We are emanating from beautiful West Raleigh, home of the NC State Wolfpack. My name is Bill Hunt. I'm a William Neal Reynolds professor and extension specialist in the Biological and Agricultural Engineering Department, and I'm joined today by a guest host, Mr. Jason Wright. And Jason is an alum, multiple-time alum of NC State, including from our department. He's a water resources engineer now with Tetra Tech. And Jason, thanks so much for sticking around with us after our last interview.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. It's great to be here. Nice. I'm honored to be part of your fourth ever podcast.
Yeah, well, you're going to do a great job.
How are you?
I'm doing great. You know, I just got back. I was overseas.
I heard you had a little trip to Jordan.
I did. You know, the Jordanians, it was great. The Jordanians are very friendly people. And in fact, real quick story, my first night there, you need to fly over. It's a long flight, right? You get there, you've just flown about 7,000 miles, and I get to Madaba, which is this incredible city outside of Amman, and I go to my hotel, and a guy says, look, if you want to go eat, you know, you go here to get shawarma, you go here to get, you know, kanafa, you go here to get this other thing. So I'm making my last stop, I'll go get a shawarma. And here I am, not knowing how much these people speak English, and I'm like, English? And the guy just kind of looks at me funny. I said, one shawarma? And he goes, do you want beef or lamb? So I said, oh, that's cool. And I just talked a little bit more. And he says, so, what's your name? And I said, Bill. And this is like from a street vendor, right? I said, Bill. Okay. And he goes, Bill? I said, Bill, like Bill Clinton. Okay, so people know, Bill Clinton. And he goes, Bill Clinton. And then to be a polite guy, I'm like, well, what's your name? And he goes, Osama. I looked at him, I said, what? Usama, like Osama bin Laden?
He said that to you?
Yes, he did. I'm like, okay, well, welcome to Jordan.
I knew you would know that name. That's pretty good. So you ate food from a street vendor your first night in a new country?
Oh, yeah, and I didn't even, I maintained my gastrointestinal situation nicely the whole time.
That's brave.
Yeah. But the reason I was in Jordan was because of water scarcity issues.
Right.
And that actually is, we'll actually have a special podcast on water scarcity, and it's really an incredible project. But that's not the focus of today's. You remember what the focus of today's is?
It sounds like, I believe we were speaking with a professor from Cape Town about day zero.
That's right.
Another serious water scarcity issue.
That's exactly right. I know
there's nothing more serious than running out of water. That's
exactly right.
That is scarce.
That is a scary and a scarce-y situation, and so it's going to be Professor Neil Armitage, who is the former department head and professor in the Civil Engineering Department at the University of Cape Town. And we're going to be bringing him in on the Skype line. Well, Neil, welcome to the Stormwater Circuit Rider podcast. We are thrilled to have you. And I guess the first question, a lot of our audience probably does not know exactly what day zero is. It sounds rather foreboding. Can you explain a little bit?
Okay. So day zero was a term coined by the city, and it was really a way of focusing the citizens. So Cape Town's got 4 million people, at the importance of trying to save as much water as possible, because there was a very real threat of the dams effectively running dry. So the effectively bit is 13.5%, a sort of fairly arbitrary line, but it was set that way because it would give them a bit of reserve to play with for emergency water supply thereafter. And that line, to day zero, was basically a projection of current use on the Western Cape water supply system, assuming no rainfall and no change in behavior, that would have brought us down to that 13.5% dam full level.
Okay. And in that particular case, we haven't reached day zero yet, obviously. And every time I check, it seems like the day is getting sort of kicked back a little bit further. Is that right?
Well, it's been kicked into 2019 now, as it turns out.
So did you get some rain?
No, we didn't get any rain, but the key thing about it, as I sort of intimated, that it was about existing users. Now, one of the things a lot of people don't understand is that Cape Town does not control its own water supply system. The water supply system is a regional system controlled by the National Department of Water and Sanitation, and the Cape Town is only one user of many. There are a number of smaller municipalities, but more significant for the point of view of Day Zero is the fact that there's a substantial agricultural component coming from those dams as well. The Western Cape is the most productive agricultural area of the country. It produces something like 50% of South Africa's agricultural exports, and a lot of that is irrigated. So clearly, the big concern always from the city was that if the irrigation to agriculture was to continue, then of course it would place a huge burden on the dwindling reserves in the reservoirs. But in fact, supplies to the agricultural area were cut to effectively zero a couple of weeks back.
Wow. Okay. So what is happening in the city? What are the people of Cape Town doing to prepare for an eventual Day Zero?
Well, people in Cape Town are doing different things. It's been quite fascinating to see how different people react in a sort of crisis or a threat like this. And it varies from indifference on one side to panic on the other, and a whole lot of reactions in between. So there's the indifference of people who they've got enough money, they drill a borehole, they've got the resources to do whatever needs to be done, and then there's the panic of people who have been stockpiling, and that's been quite an extraordinary thing. How many people have rushed out to stores and bought bottled water in gargantuan quantities. It's actually quite tragic. There's also, we have a number of springs around the city because the city's surrounded by mountains. Obviously,
Yes.
There's a lot of springs.
And just for the audience, the American audience, Cape Town is absolutely one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And I'm not saying that just because you live there, but from my visit, it is a stunning city. But that's an aside.
Okay, so we have these springs, and so for the last 6 months or so, we've had this phenomenon of long queues of people queuing up to get their 25 liters of water from one of the springs. Now, this is quite strange because the spring water is not, of course, particularly high quality. Sorry.
These are springs that are popping up in neighborhoods, and
That's right.
the likelihood that the water is polluted is not insignificant.
It's very high.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, what are you doing? I mean, did you buy a rainwater harvesting system, or are you digging a well, or?
Well, personally, I have a well point which I put from years back. So the well point generally runs out around about mid-January, and I suppose just to brief, we've got a climate very similar to Los Angeles. It's a winter rainfall climate, and our winter is in your summer.
Right.
So
right.
It's the end of our summer now. So my well point usually takes me through to about January before it runs out, and it's got a surface pump, so it can't draw the water table down that far. But you mentioned rainwater tanks, and you can imagine that if you wanted to be rich quickly, you had to get into the rainwater tank business early and buy thousands of these things. So we don't have a rainwater tank. I've actually got a couple in order, but they're more for me to experiment with than because I think they're going to solve the problem. I keep telling people if they really want to seriously store their rainwater to get themselves through summer, then maybe they should convert their swimming pool into rainwater tanks, because that's about the amount of water they're going to need.
Right.
But that message hasn't gone down too well, but it is about right. You know, people rush out and they invest a lot of money in a 2 kiloliter or a rainwater tank. It's going to last a few days, and then it's empty again. But yes, rainwater tanks have been good business. Borehole drilling has been good business. I just think there's going to be a lot of people going out of business, though, when it starts raining again, as it eventually must.
That's a funny way to look at it.
Interesting. So I read an article the other day about them putting on conserving water meters on some of the lines. Is the government there instituting some restrictions to try to conserve water?
They are. The city's been very proactive for a very long time, and I don't think that always comes out through the literature and the press. In fact, way back as far as 1999, it was identified that the city needed to do more for water conservation, water demand management. And they did so. And they did so, in fact, so successfully that they kept the water supply to Cape Town pretty much constant in those intervening 19 years, at a time which the population of the city's gone up by about 60%. So it's quite extraordinary what they've done. And they did that a number of ways. So obviously pipe replacement is one, but the more important one that they did was pressure management. So they managed down the pressure at night right across the city, because obviously your greatest leakage is at 2-3 o'clock in the morning, where there's the least use of the system. So if you can bring the pressure down 20-30 meters, you can save a lot of water. And so one way or the other, the unaccounted for water of the city is being brought down from where it was originally about 25% to about 15% now, which is pretty much world standard for a 4 million city. They are better. Singapore's better. A couple of Australian cities maybe a little bit better, but it brought it down. Now the water management meters was something that was originally brought in to control overuse of water by the poor. Now, by law in South Africa, you are entitled to 6 kiloliters per household per month, free entitlement of water if you're poor. Of course, how do you define poor? That's another story, and there's an income level benchmark, but quite often it's been virtually impossible to determine who's poor or not.
Right.
So,
Neil, real quick, just quick for
Yep.
the American audience, 6 kiloliters is about 800 gallons a month, to put that in local perspective. I'm sorry, keep going.
Okay.
We're still
Right,
using
so-
gallons, Neil. I apologize.
No. I realize the United States is a bit behind the rest of the world in terms of your units and a few other things. In spite of the rude things your president says about us, we are a little bit more advanced than some. Anyway, getting back to the real thing. So the water management meters was ready to stop poor people using water and getting themselves into debt over and above their free entitlement. But more recently, in the last 6 months, I guess, it's been these water management meters, which essentially cut off your water supply once you've reached a benchmark, which I think is currently 350 liters per day, and I think it reopens. The meter reopens at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and you can carry over. So if you don't use your full allocation of 350 liters. Okay, so where's your gallons thing? I mean, it's
That's fine.
Back to your gallons thing.
350 is about 50 gallons.
Yeah,
It's
so
almost exactly
it's
50 gallons.
once you've used your allocation, it cuts off until 4 o'clock the next morning. But if you haven't used your allocation, it accumulates. They started doing that with rich people now. So this was all about trying to control rich people who were simply buying their way out of the crisis. So I'm rich, I've got lots of money, I can afford to pay whatever you like for water. It doesn't matter how much you put up the tariffs. I would rather pay a high tariff than see my garden die. And a lot of people took that position. So way back in about September last year, the city identified 120,000 households that were using 20 kiloliters a month or more. 20 kiloliters a month or more is actually not a particularly large quantity of water by American standards. I would guess you probably twice that on average, or certainly 1.5 times that on average. So we're not talking about a huge amount of water, but nevertheless, when you're facing the worst drought on record, which has variously been estimated between a 300 and 1,000-year drought, every drop counts. So we had this interesting move in the city's management policy from putting these on the poor people to stop them from going into debt, to putting them on the rich people to stop them sucking out of the system because they could afford to. And as a consequence of that, they've now rolled out, I forget where we got to now, but they've rolled out about 25,000 of these things. And they brought down the number of high-end users, individuals now, from the 120,000 about 6 months ago to probably about 20,000 now. And that's the last figure I've seen. It's probably come down even more. I mean, to put things in perspective, in a normal summer, Cape Town would use about 1,200 megaliters per day. And the city we're currently running at around about 500. The city's trying to get us down to about 450. So we're using nearly only just over a third, about 40% of our normal water use at this time of the year, which is spectacular. I mean, I don't know anywhere in the world that they've managed this down without turning the taps off. I can go and turn my tap on if I want to. Water comes out.
That is a hat tip to Cape Town. And the last thing I want to talk about is I've read that they're thinking about making a big investment in the desalination plant. Is that still in the works, or?
Well, the city's been in an interesting position because, of course, at the same time as its income is being cut because people are saving water, so they're not paying for water, then they've had to look at other investments. And the national government hasn't really helped, to tell you the truth. But certainly what the city's done is about when it was about June last year, June last year, they put out a series of tenders, if you like. Well, they asked for expressions of interest for people who could help supplement the water supply because we don't know how long this drought's going to last.
Right.
The rains will start in about 2 months' time. We may get a normal rainfall, in which case we'll start to recover. But if we get another dry year, we're really struggling. So we need to supplement that system. So there's a whole range of options put in, of which desalination there were a number of desalination offers. Now, I mean, one of the things is that quite a few of us have been pushing back against desalination for a long time because it's very expensive.
It's energy intensive as well.
In terms of energy and costs, capital costs, and also the brine that it produces provides as an environmental concern that has to be managed very carefully. Basically, you have to have a long submarine pipeline to discharge it into the sea, into the rough part of the sea. So it's hugely expensive, but there's a lot of political pressure. Everybody keeps berating the city for being stupid because why didn't we have these big desalination works? And the city has really struggled to convey to people that to rush to build a big desalination works would be making the same mistake as the Eastern Australian cities like Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne made when they invested huge amounts of water in desalination plants, which were turned off almost immediately after they were commissioned because of the climate. The rains came back and the dams were full and all the rest of it.
Once you have a normal supply, desal plants are not economical to run.
No, they're not particularly economical to run unless you do them like Perth when you run them as a base load, which the city might do yet. But what the desalination plants they've got now are really more of a PR relations than anything else. I think there are two that produce 7 megaliters a day, one that produces 2 megaliters a day when they're commissioned, which will be in a couple of months' time. Well, if you think of 7 plus 2, that's 16 megaliters per day against our current managed water use of 500 megaliters per day, it's going to do virtually nothing. So the more important things are around groundwater. The city has now got quite serious about trying to develop the groundwater capacity in the city. In the city, large parts of the city are in sand, deep sand. So there is quite a large amount of water trapped in the surface aquifer. Part of my research is looking how we can augment it through stormwater management. And it's the groundwater that's making the difference at the moment. They're pumping a lot of groundwater into the system to help supplement, and that promises to be able to provide maybe 100 megaliters per day. So 100 from groundwater and 16 from desalination, and groundwater costs a quarter of what desalination costs. You can see how the numbers add up. But groundwater doesn't appear to be sexy. Groundwater is not something that the average public person understands, really. They understand desalination because somewhere.
Yeah, Neil, thank you so very much. This has been very, very insightful. And what I'm hearing is that we need to have a decently wet winter in a couple months, and then maybe you guys will be able to skirt day zero for much, much longer. But all this other research, I think, in the long term, you're going to have a little bit more reliable water supply, which in the end, I guess, is what a city like Cape Town that's growing so much will really need.
Well, I think just to finish off, I think what the city's talked about as resilience is the fact that we don't know what the climate's going to do, but we do know the city's growing. We're doubling about every 25 years. So we're 4 million now. We could quite conceivably be 8 million people in 25 years' time, which is really just around the corner. And we've used up all our surface water resources. We have to be much smarter in the sources we use. And so we will have desalination. We'll have big plants, no doubt, by probably reusing renewables. We will have groundwater with probably managed aquifer recharge. And the other thing that the city's now looking at very seriously is treatment and reuse of sewage. We already do that on a small scale. I'm sure we're going to see full scale 100% recovery of sewage within a couple of years. And all of these measures together will help build up a resilience against the inevitable next drought that comes along.
Well, Neil, thank you so very much, and I appreciate you staying up a little later for us to do this, have this conversation. And please give my best to your family and my friends in Cape Town.
Well, my regards to your family as well, and I must admit I enjoyed my time in Raleigh and would love to get back there sometime.
Would love to see you. All the best, my friend.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that was pretty interesting what he had to say, isn't it, Jason?
It was, and I think that I know this is about water scarcity, but I think the socioeconomic aspects of this issue are also quite fascinating. So I think the article I read was a lot about the poor accusing the wealthy of stealing or taking the water for themselves.
Right, and there's probably, I mean, and not just there, but there's probably a true history of that, or Yeah. So anyway, well, thank you. I hope you enjoyed being a co-host today.
I did. Thank you. It was quite an honor.
It was great to have you for episode 4, and I would like to, as always, thank Simone Keith, who is our technical director. Always does a great job. I appreciate you keeping me in line, Simone. Remember, we're always happy when it rains.